For 25 years, I performed my role in my husband Arthur's sacred weekend ritual. I would pack the bags for his trip to the lake house, a sanctuary I was forbidden from ever seeing. "It's a man's space, Eleanor," he'd say, a gentle but unbreakable rule that defined the boundaries of my life. So when the call came that he had died there, in that secret place, the wave of grief I expected never arrived. In its place was a vast, chilling silence, a profound and unsettling relief from a life lived by his rules. What I didn't know was that the place he guarded so fiercely wasn't just a house. It was the tomb of a completely different life he lived without me. And his will was a final, calculated act of control from beyond the grave, a poison pill hidden in the legal jargon, designed to ensure that the moment I uncovered his truth, I would be left with absolutely nothing. Before we jump into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories reach and connect with amazing viewers like you. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next surprising turn in our journey. Now, get comfortable and let's dive into a tale that will leave you inspired and intrigued. Chori Neuroars. My name is Eleanor Vance, and for 25 years, my life ran with the precision of a Swiss watch that I was never allowed to wend. It was a perfect, hollow existence orchestrated by my husband, Arthur, within the grand silent walls of our home in the Boston suburbs. He was a man of rules and numbers, a successful investor who measured affection in financial stability and quiet obedience. For my part, I learned to measure my own happiness by the length of the silences in our impeccably furnished rooms, silences that grew longer with each passing year. I remember one particular dinner party, the crystal glasses gleaming under the recessed lighting, our guests a curated collection of Arthur's business associates. The topic turned to a new urban development project, and having read an article about its environmental impact, I ventured a small opinion about preserving green spaces. Arthur didn't look at me, but he placed his hand gently on my arm, a gesture our guests saw as affectionate. I felt its weight for what it was, a silencer. "Eleanor has a passion for gardening, not governance," he announced to the table with a thin, dismissive smile. The conversation immediately pivoted, leaving me stranded in a beautifully decorated prison of my own making, my face warm with a blush no one was meant to notice. This control extended to every corner of my life. Even my interactions with his family were subtly policed. His sister, Beatrice, would call me weakly, her voice a sharp instrument of scrutiny disguised as friendly chatter. "Eleanor, darling," she'd said just a month before Arthur's death, "I saw the hydrangeas you chose for the charity luncheon. A bit voluminous. Don't you think Arthur's position requires a more classic, understated aesthetic? Do try to remember that." Every choice was a test, and I was perpetually failing to meet a standard that was never explicitly defined but always ruthlessly enforced. Amidst all these rules, one was absolute, a sacred ground I was never to cross his cabin on Lake Winnipesaukee. He went there every weekend for what he called fishing, an activity he insisted was too rugged, too demanding of absolute solitude for a woman, especially for me. "It's not a place for you, Ellie," he'd say, the casual dismissal clipping the end of his sentence. And I learned not to ask again. I would pack his bag every Friday, a thermos of black coffee, his waxed Barber jacket, thick woolen socks, a ritual of a life I was not invited to witness. I would then spend my weekends wandering our museum-like home, ensuring the flower arrangements were just so. The dust never settled, maintaining a perfection for an audience of one who wasn't even there. Life continued in that state of cold, accepted distance until a Monday morning when two state troopers appeared at my door. Their polished shoes seemed to profane the pristine marble of the foyer. They spoke in low, practiced tones about a slip, a fall near the dock, an accident. Arthur was gone. The world tilted on its axis, but I felt strangely anchored, my feet firm on the ground. Later that day, his lawyer, a man named Mr. Hemlock with a voice as dry as old paper, called to offer condolences. His voice lacked any real warmth. He ended the call not with comfort, but with a chilling warning that settled deep in my bones. "Mrs. Vance," he said, a sudden, uncharacteristic hesitancy entering his tone, "there are some irregularities in Arthur's will concerning the New Hampshire property. I strongly advise you not to make any decisions about it until we can speak in person." In the days following the funeral, The emptiness of the house wasn't painful, it was a deafening quiet, a kind of freedom I had never known. Beatrice, of course, attempted to orchestrate my morning. Her voice a sharp command center through the phone, telling me which caterer to use for the reception, which suit of Arthur's to donate. You must be devastated, Eleanor. Just let me handle things. You've never been good with practicalities, she'd say, her words weaving a familiar narrative of my incompetence. But I felt a pang of guilt for admitting to myself that my lungs seemed to draw in more air now, that my steps felt lighter on the Persian rugs. I began the task of clearing out Arthur's home office, not to reminisce over a shared past, but to methodically dismantle his fortress, to reclaim the inches and feet of space that had been his domain for so long. My desire wasn't to mourn the man I knew, but to finally understand the part of his life that had been a locked door to me. I started with his closets, the rows of severe, dark suits hanging like ghosts of his authority. I ran my hands over the fine wool, the starched cotton, materials that held no memory of a tender touch. It was in his heavy mahogany desk that my search truly began. I spent hours sorting through files filled with financial reports and stock certificates, a language of a world I was never encouraged to understand. As I reached for the back of a stuck drawer, my fingers brushed against a loose panel, a false bottom. Beneath it lay a worn leather-bound journal. I expected a hidden ledger, but instead, its pages were filled with breathtakingly detailed sketches of birds. I paused on one in osprey, its wingspan rendered in meticulous cross-hatching, talons outstretched just inches above a shimmering water surface. The notes beside it weren't scientific. They were observations of its fierce, unapologetic solitude, a phrase that resonated deep within me. It was the work of a sensitive, observant soul, the soul of a man I had never met. Tucked into the final page was a faded Polaroid picture. It showed a young boy, beaming with a gap-toothed smile, sitting next to a man who was unmistakably a younger Arthur. But the woman beside them, with her arm around the boy, was a violent, white scratch. Her face had been deliberately, furiously clawed away, leaving a haunting void where a person should have been. I traced the jagged edges of the scratch with my fingernail. It wasn't an act of passion. It was an act of surgical erasure, a calculated removal from history. That image became an obsession, a silent scream in the quiet of the house. That night, I decided I had to go. Before I left, I sent a short, simple text to Beatrice. I am going to Arthur's cabin for a few days to sort through his personal effects. I knew it would alarm her. It was the first decision about Arthur's property I had ever made without consultation. Her reply was instant. Don't be foolish, Eleanor. Wait for the lawyer. I ignored it. Driven by the ghost in that photograph, I got in Arthur's car, a heavy, dark sedan that still smelled faintly of his expensive, sterile cologne, and headed north. The city's manicured suburbs slowly gave way to the rugged, untamed landscape of New Hampshire. With each mile, I felt like I was shedding a layer of skin, leaving behind the woman who arranged flowers and planned dinner parties. The road narrowed, the pristine asphalt turning to gravel, a physical transition away from the curated perfection of my life. When I arrived, the silence was so profound I could hear the anxious beat of my own heart. The main cabin was just as I had pictured it, masculine, orderly, and deeply impersonal. A fire had been laid in the hearth but never lit. Expensive fishing rods were mounted on the wall, but a thin layer of dust covered them, a testament to their disuse. They were props in a play I hadn't understood. My intuition told me the answers I was looking for weren't here. I walked around the property until I found it. A small weathered workshop set back near the trees, a building I had only glimpsed on a satellite image when I first looked up the address. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was thick with the rich scent of pine and cedarwood. The space was a world away from the sterile cabin. It was filled with the most exquisite wooden sculptures of birds, the very ones from his journal, carved with a lifelike detail that made them seem poised for flight. Sunlight streamed through the dusty windows, illuminating the fine grain of the wood, the delicate curve of a wing. This was not a hobby. It was a life. This was Arthur's soul, bare and vulnerable. On a workbench in the corner, I found a wooden box. It wasn't filled with fishing lures, but with letters, dozens of them, written in a delicate looping script. They were from a woman detailing the life of a boy named Leo. I read one, my hands trembling. Leo won the science fair, it said. He built a small volcano, and the look of pure joy on his face when it erupted with baking soda and vinegar. I wish you could have been there. He looks for you in the crowd at every event, He misses you terribly. Arthur, we both do. And there, leaning against the far wall, covered by a canvas drop cloth, was a large, unfinished oil painting. It depicted a teenage boy with Arthur's intense eyes, and beside him, the faint, ghostly outline of a woman was beginning to take shape. As I stood there, my world fracturing, a quiet, weary voice came from the doorway. He said he was going to finish it this summer. I turned to see an older man with a kind, weathered face and a thick flannel shirt. It was Julian, the groundskeeper. He looked at me not with surprise, but with a deep, familiar sadness, as if he'd been expecting me for years. He told me everything, not as a confession, but as if he were finally unburdening himself of a weight he had carried for too long. Arthur never came here to fish. His weekends were spent in this workshop, becoming the artist his own powerful father had forbidden him to be. He came here to secretly meet Leo, the son from his first love, a woman his family had forced him to leave when they arranged his marriage to me to seal a business merger. Julian explained that Arthur was trapped. He loved his son, but he was a coward, terrified of his family's wrath. "He wasn't a bad man, ma'am," Julian said softly, his eyes looking at a distant point beyond the trees. "Just a weak one. It was like watching a light go out every Sunday evening. He'd put his city armor back on, piece by piece, his face growing hard again. He built 2 cages for himself and lived in both of them." Just as the terrible truth was settling over me, Beatrice's car screeched to a halt outside. My text message had been a homing beacon for her fear and control. She stormed in, her city heels sinking into the soft earth, her face a mask of fury. She saw the letters in my hand, the painting, and the look on my face. "I knew you shouldn't have come here," she hissed. She confessed that she had known about Leo all along, that she had helped Arthur maintain the secret to protect the family name. Then she shouted that I had always been nothing more than a part of a contract, a presentation wife, to maintain the family's public image. Then she delivered the final crushing blow. She pulled a folded document from her purse, a copy of the will. "He knew you might find out one day." "Eleanor," she sneered. "He was always one step ahead." Her manicured finger pointed to a clause circled in red ink. It read, "In the event that Eleanor Vance becomes aware of the existence of my son, Leo, she is to inherit nothing beyond the Boston house, as our marriage was fundamentally a business agreement which has fulfilled its terms." The betrayal wasn't just from my dead husband, it was from an entire system that had used me as a placeholder for a quarter of a century. In the face of Beatrice's triumphant rage and Julian's pity, a strange, cold calm washed over me, and then I started to laugh. It wasn't the sound of hysteria, but of pure, absolute liberation. I looked Beatrice straight in the eye, my voice even and clear. "You can have it," I said. "You can have it all. Keep the house, the money, and all the ugly secrets that come with them. What I found here today is worth more than anything Arthur could ever leave me." I turned and walked away without looking back, leaving Beatrice speechless among the wooden birds she never knew existed. I got in my car and drove, not back to Boston, but west, toward a future that was finally, terrifyingly, my own. The drive was a blur of highways and anonymous motels. My first act of freedom was to hire a lawyer of my own, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who confirmed that the Boston house was legally mine. I instructed her to sell it immediately, before the final sale. I walked through its empty, echoing rooms one last time. The spaces where I had felt so small and silent now seemed full of possibility. I took nothing with me except for a small, worn gardening trowel, an object that had always been truly mine. The process was swift and impersonal. I sold every piece of jewelry Arthur had ever given me, the cold diamonds and heavy gold that had felt more like payments than gifts. With that money, a liberation fund, I bought a small, slightly run-down house on the Oregon coast, a place where the air smelled of salt and rain. I started my own business, a nursery specializing in native plants and wildflowers. The work was hard, physical. My hands, once soft and manicured, became calloused and stained with soil. I spent my days propagating ferns, nurturing seedlings, and talking to customers about the quiet joy of helping things grow. An elderly woman named Margaret, a widow with eyes that held a universe of stories, became a regular. We spoke of root rot and aphids, but our conversations were really about resilience, about what it takes to survive a harsh winter and bloom again. Some things only grow stronger after a fire, she told me one afternoon, handing me a cutting from her prized rose bush. My new life was simple, and for the first time it was mine. I learned the names of the local birds, the ones Arthur had only ever captured in wood. I felt a kinship with them, with their freedom and their instinct for survival. One evening, a fierce coastal storm rolled in, threatening to destroy a greenhouse full of fragile seedlings. I spent all night securing tarps and reinforcing the frame, the wind and rain lashing against me. I was exhausted, soaked to the bone. But as the sun rose on my intact greenhouse, I felt a surge of pride so fierce it brought tears to my eyes. I had protected something I had built with my own two hands. My final act of reclamation came one morning at dawn. I walked out onto a public fishing pier, not with an expensive, unused rod from Arthur's collection, but with a simple one I had bought myself. I didn't know the first thing about fishing, but that wasn't the point. I stood there, alone, the salty wind whipping my hair, the cold of the rod a solid presence in my hands. I cast my line into the gray, churning Pacific. I didn't catch a thing. But as the sun rose, painting the clouds in shades of pink and gold, I understood. Arthur never let me go fishing because he knew. He knew that if I ever learned to love my own quiet company, to find peace in my own patient solitude, I would never have needed him at all. He left me an empire of lies, but in doing so, he accidentally gave me the key to my own life, a life not measured by stock portfolios or social standing, but by the profound freedom of standing alone, facing the vast, open ocean, and finally casting a line for myself. Sometimes, the life we are given is not the one we are meant to live. It can be a beautiful cage, decorated with the expectations of others, where our own voice becomes a forgotten whisper. But truth, like a persistent root, has a way of breaking through the most solid foundations. The discovery of a long-buried secret isn't just an ending. It is often a violent, necessary beginning. To walk away from the wreckage of a life that was never truly ours is not an act of surrender, but of profound strength. It is in the quiet, lonely work of rebuilding with our own hands, in our own time, that we discover our true foundation. We learn that a legacy is not what is written for us on paper, but what we cultivate in the soil of our own choosing. It is the resilience we nurture in the face of the storm, the peace we find in our own company, and the freedom we claim when we finally decide to cast a line into an ocean of our own. True liberation is not the absence of scars, it is the wisdom to know they are a map that leads us back to ourselves. Thank you so much for being with us on this powerful journey of self-discovery. Every story is a shared experience, and we would be honored to hear yours. What part of this journey resonated with you the most? Please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your perspective enriches this community immeasurably. If you found meaning in this tale, please consider subscribing to our channel and turning on notifications. We are so grateful for your support and look forward to sharing our next story with you.